All right. I've never thought about how to start this. Should we say hi?
Yeah. Okay, wait.
Okay.
Yeah, we can just say, like, you want to say, like, oh yeah, we can. I didn't have to roll.
Hi, I'm Kenneth.
And I'm Maya. Welcome to Journey to the Double Doc. We are incoming MD PhD students at Penn and Harvard MIT, and we wanted to create this channel to chronicle our training paths.
We hope to share things that we learned along the way that we wish we had known, as well just as to be a general resource for those interested and passionate about science and medicine. So feel free to contact us at our Twitter handles or our email. We would love to hear what you want us to talk about, and so welcome to our channel and hope you will join us on our journey. I was like,
And I was like, oh my god, like, why are you talking about this? Like, your first impression.
Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel. Recently, I have been interviewing MD applicants here at Penn, so I thought it'd be a good time to talk about some do's and don'ts and general tips and tricks for interviewing virtually. Immediately, one of the hardest things that I find to do is to make sure I'm looking at the camera instead of looking at the screen. I think that is important because it gives this appearance of eye contact to the interviewer, and so it is very difficult to do because I think naturally we want to like look down instead of looking at the cameras. So putting something in the general area behind the camera could be helpful to remind yourself to look directly at the camera to give that appearance of eye contact.
Yeah, definitely. Those are all really great tips. And I feel like one thing I've actually noticed just talking to my friends who are doing virtual interviews is like how many things actually do translate over to the virtual interview process. So even though you're online and not in like an in-person waiting room with people, like still try to get to know the other applicants, if there are opportunities, definitely take advantage of times to get to know the other students. It seems like, at least from the Harvard admissions process, that there's going to be a lot of optional events. And like, I don't think anyone will hold it against you if you're too tired and you can't come to all of them. But I do think they're a really great way to kind of get to know the school and sort of still try to think about where you would want to go, even though obviously it's harder to do online.
I totally agree with Maya there. Interviews were very important for me to figure out what was a good fit for me at a program. And that really came through by talking to students. I know Penn is making a very large effort on both the MD and MD PhD side to put students out in front of applicants to be a point of contact, to answer any questions. So make use of that opportunity in order to get a feel for the school, the city, anything about attending the school. I've been asked about moving to Philly, the neighborhood, how Penn has been adapting the curriculum to COVID. All great questions to, I hope, for the applicant to get a good sense of how they would interact or fit at Penn or at any institution.
Definitely. I also think that there's definitely some pros to having virtual interviews. I mean, besides the obvious about saving money on travel and time, like think about the fact that you can make your environment a little bit more comfortable than it would necessarily be in the actual interview day. So like, for example, one thing that I always disliked on the interview trail was like trying to keep track of time and like looking at my watch during meetings, which like obviously you don't want to do. So like if you're comfortable with it, have like a clock in your room, like put it somewhere you can see it so that you're not constantly like fiddling around with Zoom or whatever you're using and trying to see the time. Put some water next to you. If you have something that makes you happy, like a picture or something, like keep it there, but just like realize that like this is a great time to like be really comfortable. So like make sure your environment not only looks good and looks professional, but is somewhere where you can sit for like 5 or 8 hours a day and not get super stressed out.
And if your environment for whatever reason is challenging to accommodate interview, please let schools know. They're more than happy to work with you in any way or to make sure that they're able to facilitate an interview process that works for both sides
Definitely. Yeah, I know one thing for me is just like my Wi-Fi goes in and out, and like that's definitely not an ideal situation for schools. So like being able to let them know that in advance is awesome. And then also I've been going to like the library a lot when I've had interviews for clubs, just like spaces like that you can reserve that are kind of public but still are able to be like kind of quiet and sequestered away are awesome if you have access to them.
And on our side, we're very understanding of when like a call drops, something disconnects. We're more than happy to move the time or figure out a different arrangement. So we do want to communicate that the schools are very flexible and understanding during this time as well.
one thing that is just really nice probably for people to hear is that like people are being accommodating, because I've been talking to applicants and I think it's just a super stressful time to be interviewing virtually. So I think also one thing we do want to get at before going into like our specific tips about interviews is just try not to stress about the virtual format. It's tough not to, but I think that in the end it usually works out pretty well, and people are also experiencing issues on their end with technology, and like you're definitely not the first person who will experience it, and it's going to be fine.
Shall we move into those more specific tips?
Yeah, definitely. So actually it was interesting. I was talking to a few people who were applying MD PhD a few days ago, and I was kind of hearing their questions. And a big thing that I've been hearing about is like, how do we explain our research in broad enough terms that like we're able to get everything across, especially if you're going to certain schools, like for example, HMS, where you aren't interviewing with specific faculty you pointed out, but just like people that you get paired with. So there like really might be a field disconnect. And one thing that I think was really helpful for me to think about is almost like, how would you summarize your research in an abstract? Because when you're writing an abstract, you're thinking about sort of like this background, the kind of motivation, a really brief summary of what you did. Again, this kind of goes back to Zoom body language. It's easy to ramble on Zoom. I feel like relative to in person, it's like try to be concise, but still give kind of the major findings. And then also sort of future directions and like why you see this work being important, but also how it could relate to work that you might want to explore in your graduate career, whether it's going to be a continuation or something kind of new that's been inspired by what you've done before.
Those are great points. Something that I only recently thought about was when reflecting upon my own experience interviewing, I had a project that could have been framed in a number of different ways. I think that if I was more explicit with my framing up front, like I'm going to tell you a story about cellular bio, like a cell bio story, and not like a neuroscience or neurobiology story, that could have been a bit more helpful, because though I was working in the context of developmental neurobiology, at the core of it, my project was a cell biology project. And so specifically flag posting how you want to what kind of story you want to tell your audience is helpful, so that they are also approaching it in the same framework you are, so that when you're telling them about organelles and stuff, it makes sense to them that, oh, right, I'm hearing a cell bio kind of story. And so it's just easier for them to be on the same page as you are if you take some time to flag post appropriately at the beginning of your explanation.
Yeah, I think that's a really great tip. And I think also going off of it, I know that in our past interview video and like sort of talking about our own experiences, we mentioned interviews where we like whiteboarded or like basically kind of presented our research on a board. Obviously that's not happening this year. So I think it's especially good to really think about how you can verbally communicate ideas. So like take some extra time to think about that, because I think it's a little bit different than what you might have experienced in lab presentations, where like you always have some sort of visual cue to point things out. So I think that's another like slight weird thing about the virtual interview format, really going back to these like oral presentations of what can be pretty complex research projects. Another question that I've been hearing a lot is like what to expect in terms of like when you're going to get your interviewers, like what it means if your interviewer is a student or faculty. And I think the biggest thing to know is that like it's kind of 50-50, maybe a little bit more leaning towards schools who will give you the interviewer names in advance. But even still, like you're not expected to like suddenly know like everything about their career or everything about the sort of research they do, although it's nice to have that experience. And similarly with students, like there really is no disadvantage to having a student interview or a faculty interview. In general, students interviews will be a little bit more chill, but that also isn't necessarily like a hold on pattern. So I think the biggest thing is just making sure that whoever you're talking to, you're still like being as nice and courteous and like presenting your best self as possible. I think it can definitely be natural just when you're with a student to almost become a little bit more casual, and I think to an extent that's okay, but also like still try to stay in like the interview mindset when you're in an evaluative situation, even if it is like a student interview.
Something to be aware of that happens at some schools is that some faculty interviews will be members of some kind of committee, whether that be like the steering committee of the program or the AdCom committee specifically at that program. They tend to be at the schools that do them, they tend to stick out because they will have given you faculty that match your research interests, and then all of a sudden you have faculty who do something wholly different. And so those faculty interview you with the explicit purpose of reporting back to the committee in some form or another to evaluate you. If you're unsure, most of the times you can ask your students that the program has put you in contact with. They'll point out the people who are serving that function on your interview day. And so if you are given people who all of a sudden do research that is wildly different from everyone else, that's a kind of a hint that it might be one of those interviews instead.
Yeah, definitely. And like, again, it kind of goes back to an earlier point, but a lot of places that I've been hearing about are like matching students up with student hosts anyway, even though it's like a virtual student host. It's like these are all great questions to talk to someone about. And like, even if you don't feel like you have that many questions, I think if you have the option to be connected to a student and have that kind of be your point person, that's really nice because inevitably things will come up. And it's great to have someone that you can email or text with a question instead of just trying to ask them during like weird Zoom info sessions where it's hard to get a word in.
And if you are connected with a student or students before the interview, something that I've always liked to ask is why this school? I think that is a very common interview question, and it's a question that can be difficult to answer just based on reading websites. Having a student in the program to talk about that question, that was very helpful for me in thinking how I wanted to answer questions in that vein during my interviews at each school.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it is such an important question to get it because, like, I think it's easy for, saying why the school to come up with a bunch of really great characteristics of that school. But then it's also true of a bunch of other schools, like saying, like, they're very collaborative or they emphasize collaboration or, like, they have great research. Most schools have kind of those similar characteristics. So, like, trying to make sure that you're also finding things that are kind of unique or, like, at least more unique to the school that you're talking about just to show that you really have done your homework and there are specific reasons why you'd love to be there over, other schools that are similar in other regards.
And in hearing these answers, you're also getting a sense of fit for yourself too about the program. It's not solely performative for answering that interview question. It's also important to think and hear those answers and think about them because how do they align with what you want out of your 8 years or 6, 7, or 8 years here?
Definitely. Yeah, and like just to give some ideas of things that we thought about, talking about the advising structure I found has been really useful. Talking about like how the PhD application process works, like are you already into the program? Do you apply for that? Exactly how that shakes out. Talking about like also just like more informal mentorship opportunities. It's like most programs will have a big siblings program, but it's nice to kind of hear a little bit more about how that's done and sort of what's available to you in that regard. And then also, yeah, it's always great to just kind of find out more about the city or wherever place you would potentially be living because it's much harder to do over virtual, but it's good to kind of get a sense of what's going on in that place. Also, I think one good question that's specific to this year is asking how the school has responded to COVID-19, particularly in how they're dealing with students. Because like I think you'll learn a lot from schools that maybe have been like very understanding and flexible with students versus schools that maybe haven't had as great of a response that the students have appreciated. So like maybe that will also give you an idea of how a school responds in kind of crisis situations or like where you would kind of fit in that environment.
Yeah, I think COVID response, in particular, living through COVID changed curriculum, exposes a lot about how an administration runs their school. So it's something that I think is very valuable to ask current students to see their perspective on how admin has been dealing with the challenges that COVID-19 presents to each institution. So at the end of the day, even though it's a new format, I think the goals for both the applicant and the institution remain the same. And so approach interviews as you would have were they not virtual. Try to get to know the school, try to get a sense of fit, and try to communicate with the school why you would be a great fit, what things about you wish with things that you wish to highlight in your application or things that you didn't get a chance to mention in your application. I think the interview is a really good spot to be thinking about what did I not get a chance to write about? What did I not get a chance to tell the school more about? And in particular, were there any of those things that were particularly relevant to the school? I tried during my interviews to give applicants space to mention things that they have not yet mentioned in their primary or their secondary, whether that is explicitly or implicitly. But if your interviewer doesn't give you the opportunity, they're going to definitely ask, do you have any questions for me? Don't be afraid to take that time and say, hey, there was something that I didn't get a chance to mention yet. This is something that I want to share with you. Go ahead and share it, and then go into the questions that you have for your interviewer. Don't be afraid to make space for yourself to share what you want to communicate to the AdCom.
Definitely. That's super awesome advice. So as we're kind of wrapping up, we also just wanted to say that we're going to be putting 2 links in basically the description of the video. One is a APSA seminar that was about virtual interviews from this year, and then the other is from the AAMC, and it's more general virtual interview advice, but I think all of it is really great, and it ranges from like how you actually phrase answers to like more logistical stuff, like making sure that your background is professional.
And for those who don't know, what is APSA?
APSA is the American Physician Scientists Association. So basically, it's a great way to get information about the physician scientist track, and you hear a lot of great information about the application process as well.
Yeah, they have great, phenomenal resources on their website as well. So just dig around. Cool.
So with that, we'll wrap up. And as always, if there's any questions or you want to talk about the interview process, either drop us a comment or tweet us. We'll have our Twitter handles in our bio, and we're looking forward to talking to you guys soon.